Welcome to Politicus, the only podcast that discusses politics and public service from the Portuguese-American perspective. Here we discuss everything from federal policy, local issues, and U.S.-Portugal relations with the goal of driving more discussion and awareness of the issues affecting our nation, our community, and what we as Portuguese-Americans can do about it. And now, Politicus. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Politicus. I'm Angela Samos, and I'm here with Denise Borges. Hey, Denise.
Hey, Angela. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. Excited for another episode of Politicus.
Yes, and we have one of our local guys here today with us, Scott Silveira. Hi, Scott.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here.
So I love your story, which, obviously we've heard before recording this call, or this podcast. So why don't we start with you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, how you became involved in public service, because you're currently a city councilman, right?
Yes, the city of Los Banos councilman. I'm on my 6.5 years of being on the city council in Los Banos.
Wow. So tell us about that. How did you get started, about yourself, what you did this morning? Because I think that's important for listeners to know that, what city councilmen also do, that they have day jobs too.
Correct. And so I'll go back and start off from, I was born and raised in Los Banos. My family has a tie to the dairy industry. Both sides of the family at one point were in the dairy business. And then, they got out of the dairy business, and then my family started back in the dairy business in 1990. Mm-hmm. So in 1990, we started a dairy in Dos Palos, and actually I was in the 7th grade, and I moved out of my parents' house and moved into and lived with my brothers on the dairy. And so I went through school in Los Banos, kindergarten through 8th grade, and I actually went to high school in the next town over, Dos Palos. And so I started out there and I have a love for agriculture. It's what I know. It's what I've been raised around, and I've continued on in the family business. And to this day, I'm still a dairyman. And this morning before the podcast, I was out feeding cows, breeding cows, taking care of cows, and actually started my day a little bit early so I could make my time to be here with you guys. So, and then I want to tell you guys a funny story it's my public service interest in the political world started when I was about 8 years old at the May Day Fair. And, of course, I was only 8 years old, so I didn't really know a lot about what a mayor was, but I knew that a mayor was an important person. And so I met the mayor of Dos Palos. Now, I want to put in perspective, Dos Palos at that time was probably a town of about 5,000 people. But I have to tell you, as an 8-year-old, meeting a mayor, he shook my hand, and I was hooked forever. I thought I was a pretty important guy. I walked around the fair the rest of that week thinking that I was pretty important stuff because I met the mayor of Dos Palos. And it started this lifelong love affair with community service and being a part of community and giving back to your community. And so where it's taken me is I was the president of my 4-H club. I was the president of my FFA chapter. When I was 18 years old, I became a volunteer fireman with Merced County Fire Department. And soon after that, I became the volunteer fire chief. And then that took me into the world of becoming the president of the Volunteer Fire Chiefs Association. And so I've always been a person that, I love my community. I do. I was never that person growing up that wanted to leave. The Central Valley, where we're located here in Los Banos, we have the best of all worlds. If you want to go deep sea fishing, hey, in an hour and a half from here, you could be deep sea fishing over in the Pacific Ocean. If you want to go skiing 2 hours, you could be up at one of the ski resorts. We have just numerous lakes around us. There's just so much to do. And so growing up, especially like in high school, you had those, my friends that as soon as they were done with high school, they were getting out. They were getting the heck out of here. And but I was never that person. I always wanted to stay, and it's led me to being involved in a lot of different organizations, helping with fundraising events. Another little thing I do is actually I do a little bit of auctioneering. I got my start auctioneering at Festas. That's where I've done it. My father does it, and so I've done it since I was a little boy, but never in front of other people. And they needed an extra hand at the Festa, and man, I'm going to tell you what, it's a pretty good way to start is when you're in front of a bunch of people that already and like you, and so it takes the nerves away. And so because of that, I start doing, I do the auction for the DES in Los Banos, the DES celebration in Dos Palace, and then also the OLF celebration here in Los Banos. And it's gotten to take me to some pretty cool places and to do some pretty cool events and help out with some pretty cool causes. So that's kind of that part in a nutshell. But, when it comes to the city politics, the city council, what drove me is I think that at some point I always had an opinion. I never lacked for an opinion on stuff. And back in 2007, I actually,
Portuguese person.
yeah. Back in 2007, I moved where my wife and I, which I should mention that, I did meet my high school sweetheart in Dos Palace and married her, and we have 2 children. Today's their first day of school. They're starting the 7th and the 8th grade. And so we moved into town in 2007, and you have an opinion on where you see things are going and how you think you would do it if you were there. And at some point, a person has to decide, are you going to just complain about it, or are you going to try to do something about it? And that's where I got the itch, if you will, to say, hey, you know what? If I'm going to complain about it, well, I better offer up some solutions. And that's when I started. That was back in 2010 is when I ran my first time. And I'm proud to say I was the top vote getter in the city of Los Banos. And I will tell you that one of my biggest bases of support was the Portuguese community, and they still are. I'll tell you a funny story on that. This is election day, and I go to my polling place here in town, and there's this sweet lady there, and with a very thick Portuguese accent, I tell her my name, and she tells me, "Oh, I vote for your daddy. I voted for your daddy." And
so cute.
And I said, "No, actually, you voted for me." She goes, "Oh, you got such a good last name. You got so I think that the Portuguese community, man, they're very loyal. They're very loyal people, and I think that they really truly support their own. And we're a pretty diverse group here in the Central Valley, especially in our area. And I will tell you, in my travels, I don't think that there's a group that supports their own better than the Portuguese community.
Wow.
And since you talk about that, Scott, let me piggyback on that, just ask you a couple of questions. First of all, so you mentioned that the Portuguese-American community in the Los Banos area was important to you getting elected. What are some of the issues that you think are different? Or are there any difference? The issues between the Portuguese-American community and the communities in general? And what are some of the other, so it's kind of a two-faced question. Second part would be, what are some of the issues that are different in rural California compared to either the Bay Area or Southern California? This is obviously a national podcast, and we have listeners all over. And so sometimes to most people outside of California is Hollywood and a bunch of beaches, but there's a little bit more diversity than that. So if you could touch on those two parts. First of all, what are some issues that you think may be different to the Portuguese American community than they are to other communities? You mentioned a little when we were talking before the podcast about your lack of not knowing Portuguese and that being something that you would have liked to have changed in your life, and also some of the issues that are different to people in Los Banos, and not just in Los Banos, I would say throughout the San Joaquin Valley from Stockton to Bakersfield, that are somewhat different. Some are the same and some are different than cosmopolitan areas.
Well, let me take it. The first thing what I'll tell you is I don't necessarily think that, for my local area that the issues are any different for other Portuguese Americans throughout the country. I think that we all face a lot of the same issues, and quite honestly, one of those being is that I think that with technology and society, you have so many different things pulling you so many different ways that the fear is that we lose that sense of community, the going to our festas and continuing on with the traditions that I've grown up with. I've been going to festas since I was old enough to understand, and the calendar, at least in our family, the calendar around us is dictated by, okay, when's the celebration, and so what I think that all communities are facing is how do we get that next generation involved? And I will tell you, locally here, I've seen that they've done a good job of, as some of the older folks that were kind of like the matriarchs and the patriarchs of the Portuguese celebrations locally here, they've done a good job in bringing in that, I'm 39 years old, bringing in that next generation of their kids and their grandkids to be able to keep these traditions going. And I guess that's what scares me is that it's getting harder and harder with everybody being pulled so many different ways for so many different things to keep those traditions going. So I think that's a problem that we don't only face here, but we face everywhere. Mm-hmm. And one of the regrets that I have is my great grandparents migrated from the Azores to the States. They came at a time where they wanted their children to learn English. They thought it was important that they learned English, and they didn't. They at home they only spoke to them in English, and so out of my 4 grandparents, only 2 of them spoke Portuguese fluently, and then I had my one grandma who understood Portuguese but didn't speak it, and then my other one who didn't understand or speak Portuguese, and so. If I could go back, I would like to change that. I wish that, my grandparents would have passed that on to my parents and my parents would have passed that on to us, because I think that it's a very valuable tool. When you can understand more than one language, and quite honestly, I don't care what the languages are. I guess I'm kind of, prejudiced to Portuguese because I'm Portuguese-American, and so that one's kind of important for me. But any language, I think it's an asset to you. And mm-hmm. and I see that this next generation coming up, you need to take advantage of all the one-ups, if you will, that you could put in on your side, having a work ethic, being bilingual. These are all things that are going to set you apart for the competition that's kind of there. And now when we talk about what are some of the issues that we're facing out here in California, is where I'm at, in the Central Valley, what we are is we're about as close to the Bay Area as you can get without being, the coastal range separates us. And so what you have is because the cost of living over in the Bay Area is so much higher than it is over here in the Valley, you have a lot of people that are commuting. They're commuting mm-hmm. over the hill to come, and they're living here. And my goodness, these folks are spending 4 or 5 hours a day in their car, to go to make a living. And I can get into, why I think that some of those issues, the breakdown of the family unit, it's that, mom and dad are both having to commute over the hill. They're not mm-hmm. here. Kids are kind of left to their own devices. and then they're seeking and looking for that family connection, and and some of them turn to some of the tougher places, and then this is where you end up with your gang problems and you end up with crime problems. And so something that we're trying to do as a city council is I believe that it's already hard enough to do business in the state of California, and so we have to work even harder to try to bring livable wage jobs to the valley, to where are the wages going to compete 1-to-1 with the wages in the Bay Area? I don't know that we ever get there, but if you guys will indulge me to come up with some numbers, if somebody's driving over the hill and they're making $80,000 a year, and they're having to spend 5 hours a day and fuel and wear and tear on their vehicles to be able to do that, and in Los Banos, or if they're making $40,000 a year. Well, it's obviously still worth it for them to drive over the hill and to do that, on the financial side of stuff. But if you can increase that to where maybe the wages come up to $60,000 a year here,
right.
Then they have to take a hard look. Now, is it worth 4 or 5 hours of your life every day driving in a car, wear and tear, fuel? And so it becomes important that, because we are such a ag-based community, but I think that, however, that's important, and I think that's what continues to make the city of Los Banos, the county of Merced, survive is agriculture. There has to be a fair mix of both, and you have to bring industry here so that those folks have the opportunity to live and work in the same place. And until we can do that, we experienced some of the worst, and I say this, the worst problems with when the economy crashed. Housing values in the city of Los Banos dropped by 70%.
Yeah,
70%. And that's because we're 65% of the people that live in Los Banos commute outside of Los Banos to go to work. And so you get labeled as that bedroom community. And if you continue to do that, you live and die by the housing market. And they say Einstein's definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so for me, it's something that I'm passionate about. I think it all ties together. You can make a correlation between if people can live and work in the same place, it brings up property values, crime goes down. Just there's all these things, and they're all interconnected. So they're important to me. They're important, and it's not just Los Banos. It's the Central Valley. That's what we face for a lot of years. The ag industry has been able to support this valley, and I think as people have migrated from the cities into the valley, and I think that we hit that tipping point where the ag industry is still a big part of it, but it can't sustain it. We need to bring other industry into the valley.
So to what extent do federal policies affect that for your local community? Because you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the reason people don't even leave the Bay Area. So we live in the Bay Area, and my husband and I talk a lot about, well, if we moved somewhere else in California where there's a lower cost of living, but then we won't make the salary. You know what I mean? So then we're stuck with commuting, and right now neither one of us have a commute, and so I think it's a very real problem for a lot of people in California, not just the Bay Area, not the Central Valley, but even if you went down to LA, right? I think you'd find the same challenges there. And then you talk about ag business and how do you bring wages up in a town like a city like Los Banos. So I'm curious as to how when the federal government starts to make policy and make laws and change things, how does that affect the local community?
Well, I have this saying that I tell people is the federal government prints money, the state government kind of plays the shell game with money. They take money from here and put it over there, and then at the local level, you're stuck implementing all their policies with their unfunded mandates. You're stuck implementing a policy with no real resources to address them, and so federal policy I think that it's incumbent upon us is, we make once a year we go back to Washington D.C. and they call it the One Voice trip, and it's basically local Valley elected officials head back to D.C. and you go and you meet with the Department of Ag. You go to all these transportation department, and you get these meetings, and you go beat your drum, and you try to take advantage, because if you think about it, we all pay into it, and we pay federal income tax, and you pay the money in. We need to just get our fair share back, and making smart choices on what stuff do we go at. Merced County is one of the poorest counties in the state of California. Our median income level is well below the national average, state averages. And so you're fighting those things. And so there's programs available out there. But again, it takes time and resources to identify those programs and be able to bring those dollars back to your local community. And it's trying to get the congressman or the U.S. senator from, Ohio, name the state, to understand the issues that we face out here. And so it becomes tough, because I just feel like in California, especially, the regulations every day, it seems like there's a new regulation, and when you get to the local level like we are, you can't even keep up with the regulations. You can't even enforce the regulations you have on the books, and they want to just keep adding more and more and more. And so it makes it tough as an elected official, because you have certain things that you're mandated to do, certain things that you're mandated to spend money on, and then you're stuck with this little piece of the pie that you really have discretion over. And how are you going to make that work? How are you going to better your community? And when I talked about earlier, when I talked about bringing in industry here, I was at a meeting. I was just got on city council. I was only on maybe a couple months, and I go to this meeting, and this gentleman there, he worked at a radio station, and it was like a coalition of elected officials, business leaders, and it was called McKedco. It was an economic development engine, if you will, and he stood up and he said, listen, until you're willing to put money into economic development, all you're doing is just talking about it. And it really rang true to me. And to this day, I still use that line, because this is me personally. I tell my constituents here in Los Banos, I would rather be the guy or gal that looks you right in the face and says, as your elected official, I invested, let's say, $100,000 of your hard-earned taxpayer dollars that have come to the city into trying to bring an industrial park to Los Banos, and have it not work, then just sitting here and waiting for it to come. Because if we wait for it to come, it's so competitive out here now in California that the next city over is doing that. They're a site selector. A site selector is who these big companies, the Amazons, the Costcos, the Home Depots, Targets, Walmarts of the world, they hire a site selector. A site selector's job is to eliminate sites. So they go around and they have a need and they want to be in an area, and their job is to go and eliminate. They're not necessarily looking for a site. They're going and saying, well, you don't offer this, so you're off the list. And then they have what's left. And the ones that have left have met this criteria. And so we have to try to do things we have to be able to put money into these things, but it's hard when you're making a decision. Do we hire another police officer, or do we invest into something that, I don't have a crystal ball that can tell you that it's guaranteed to work. Right. But invest into something that, you make with the best information you have that day, you make a decision and invest that money into something, because, I mentioned that industrial park, we're going down that road a little bit, and, potentially at build out, this industrial park, could employ 15,000 people. And I know not all 15,000 are going to live in Los Banos, but could you imagine what that does for not only Los Banos, but the surrounding communities of Merced County? And, if you take, for example, the city of Dos Palos, which is about 15 miles to the east of us, if a person could commute 15, 20 miles to work versus having to commute 200 miles to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Scott, as we come to almost the end of the podcast, one question I'd like to bring it back is kind of at the same time a call for our listeners, but at the same time, just recently, and you participated in the California Portuguese American Coalition's summit in Sacramento, which brought a lot of local leaders and state leaders together. PALITICUS is doing just a few weeks a congressional reception, and PALITICUS has done a wonderful job. I've been saying this for years, not just because I'm on the board, at a national level, and bringing awareness of the Portuguese American community to politicians, whether they be or public servants, whether they be of Portuguese background or not. We have to make aware. One of our problems, and I may just want to quote this very, very, very quickly before the question. When I was going to college, I had a history professor who, him and I became pretty good friends, and he influenced me in a lot of ways. And one of the things he mentioned to me when he found out I was Portuguese, he said, "You guys discovered the world, but you failed to tell anyone about it." And so I believe that is somewhat what we do sometimes in our Portuguese American communities. We get a little bit too busy with the next festa, and we forget about some of the things that are important to us at the local level, at the statewide level, and at the national level. And I know that we're all thankful to PALITICUS and other organizations that keep this awareness alive. So my kind of question to you at the end, as we come to the conclusion of this podcast, and I thank you for participating, is what do you see how do you see the importance of Portuguese Americans, such as yourself, getting involved in local politics? It was said, years ago, all politics is local. And so we getting involved in city councils, in school boards. And I mentioned school boards because you mentioned one of your regrets, and that's a regret of many Portuguese Americans. We have 400,000 Portuguese Americans in California, maybe 20,000 know how to speak Portuguese. So there's 380,000 who don't. And so, but their grandparents are not alive any longer to teach them Portuguese, and those grandparents who are alive will not teach it because of our busy lives that you just mentioned that affected things in local politics. So we need to be a little bit more aggressive. We need to have Portuguese in our public schools. We need to have Portuguese in our public universities. And a lot of these decisions are not made by the federal government, as you mentioned. They're made at the state level, and they're made at the local level, especially school board districts, as you know. So from what was done at CPAC and some of the network that went on there, from your experiences in the city council, from your experiences with the Portuguese American community, from someone who has participated in the Portuguese American community throughout his life, what would you see as a call to action to Portuguese Americans to get involved and to kind of save what our grandparents, in my case it wasn't, but because I'm an immigrant, but as such as yourself and others, what grandparents and great-grandparents and even parents have built in California?
Well, so to me, you took the words right. You have to get involved, and I think that's the only way that it's going to be done, and it starts at the grassroots level. Is you have to get involved because I'm sorry, but in society today, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and so you have to get involved, and we have to do a better job as Portuguese Americans is getting the youth involved and teaching them all those experiences that I went through growing up, being part of festas. There are things that I'm telling you, like if I go and do my life over again, they're at the top of the list of the things that I'm going to do again, because I feel like it helps to build you into the person that you are today. And so to me, you got to start, and you start at the local level, because you're absolutely right. All politics are local. I don't go to the grocery store. I don't go to a restaurant. I don't go anywhere in town without somebody talking to me about, the local issues. And so I think it starts there. And I think that it's just so important. And, there's no reason why they shouldn't be offering a Portuguese class. They offer Spanish. Why not offer Portuguese at the high school level? I think that all those things, Denise, are super important. And to tie it to CPAC, I think that, I just participated in the CPAC conference in Sacramento, and all I want to see that deal do is grow. I want to see, and I want to see with the next generation getting involved and being a part of it and passing on those traditions and our heritage, because it's shaped all of us. It's created our morals, our values, our sense of culture, our sense of family. And I'm pretty proud of those things. And we need to do a better job of sharing them with the country and the world. I think we do a lot of great things, and we need to continue to share those things, because I think when you just boil it all down, those are some of the best things that we have going for us in our country. Is those local, those tight knit groups that support each other in the good times and in the bad times. And it's a matter of getting people involved. And when you're competing with so many other interests, we have to do a better job of finding how are we going to make our groups, our organizations, rise to the top. I'm going to sound young here for a second. Make it cool to be a part of these things. And I think that is something that I strive to do all the time. Is how do we get involved? And I will tell you guys, my next step is I made an announcement a couple weeks ago. I'm running for county supervisor. So Merced County Supervisor District 5, which represents the west side of Merced County. And, I love my community. I think that the morals and values, the business sense, all those things that I bring to the table, I think it helps benefit Merced County. And, hopefully the plan is, and it's a goal of mine, is that, I'll be 40 years old next year, but hopefully by the time I'm 50, 55 years old, if not sooner, we'll have this conversation again. And I won't tell you that Merced County is one of the poorest counties in the state of California. Through some vision, through some leadership, through making some smart investments, that we were able to, do I ever think that we're going to be as wealthy as, the wealthiest counties? Well, we might not get there, but boy, it's sure nice to have a goal of trying to achieve it.
Well, and we hope that in 10 years from now, Angela and I'll be with a cane, but I hope Angela and I will be interviewing you. And by that time, I don't want to hear county supervisor. We want to hear that you're running for state office. Well,
I'm not going to say no to that, but I want to focus on the one in front of me now. I know that I'm going to, the election's not until next June, and we came out early, and we think that we represent the right things, and we're getting a lot of early support, and hopefully we can make those changes there. And that if we're successful there, and as an elected official, and for the offices I've ran for so far, they're 4-year terms, and really you don't get a report card until the next election. And if you choose to run again, and they put you back in, they give you your report card, and hopefully I'll have good grades on that report card, and could maybe achieve higher office.
Mm-hmm. Well, congratulations on announcing your candidacy for supervisor. We certainly support you, and anything we can do to help raise awareness of your campaign and generates this support. We are happy to do that. And a couple of things I wanted to just highlight throughout the conversation, because in your stories and your comments, I think there are some good lessons for us, both as citizens as well as maybe some other elected officials. And one of those first ones was that just shaking the hand of the mayor had such an impact on you. And at the time, it's probably seemed like a little thing, and your parents probably didn't even realize what an impact it had. But I think that's something for us to keep in mind, that, as parents, it is good to expose our kids to, whether it be a city council meeting or, meeting elected officials when we're at the, Christmas parade or the, 4th of July festival or whatever it is, expose our kids to that. And even if it is just a handshake, because you never know what kind of impact it will have. And then I think on the flip side, for elected officials, to never overlook the little guys, literally, the kids. I know it always makes good photo ops to have pictures with kids, but don't just look at it as a photo op, because again, you never know what kind of impact that you can have on someone's life and inspire them to get more involved. The other thing, the reason I said, tell us what you did this morning, is because just reminding people that if you're on the city council, if you hold other local other local positions, chances are you still have another job, right? That this is not your full-time thing. It's not until you get to the state and maybe federal level that it really becomes your full-time gig. And so just, for people to be reminded of that, and that, if there's anybody that's going to relate to you best, I think as a working citizen, it's going to be somebody on the city council, because they also are working citizens, right? So, wanted to highlight that. And just so many things throughout your story that I think really are relatable. And I hope people listening will take those to heart and really think about getting involved. And that could be volunteering. It could be, becoming a volunteer firefighter. It could be volunteering on a campaign. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. It doesn't mean you go, straight running for state senate, right? It doesn't have to be a major thing.
What I want to just add on to that is it taught me at an early age, and I was pretty excited that I met the mayor. But as you get a little bit older, you understand, hey, you know what? Every one of these folks puts their pants on one leg at a time, just like you and I. Mm-hmm. We're all human beings and so
right.
You don't need to fall in love with the mystique of, oh, well, that's our state senator, or that's our congressman. Hey, they're all human beings, and they all have the story, and that could be your story. And that's what's so great about this country. It doesn't matter. You could be, you could be a dairyman, you could be a garbage collector, you could be a lawnmower. It doesn't matter. You have to get involved, and you have to just be passionate about what you believe in. And I tell you, at the local level, is something that we lack right now is people wanting to get involved. And so what you end up with, this is no knock on any individual, but sometimes you end up with people because they have nothing better to do. That's all. Well, it's pretty simple. I'll get elected to the city council, and I'm telling you, they don't bring a whole lot to the table, in my opinion. I want people that are involved, that are actively out there, that work, because if you're holding down a full-time job and you still want to be on the city council, that just tells me you're passionate about it. And we need more people to be passionate about their local politics, because those are the ones that the local policymakers, your local elected officials, are the ones that are making the decisions that affect your life every day. Everybody drives up and down streets every day. They get their garbage collected. They like to water their lawn. Those things. Those are made by your local elected officials. And sometimes what I feel like is people get caught up so much in the rat race of life, just living, and that they forget about, like, it's important, those people that you elect, get to know them. And I tell you, I always appreciate the person that comes to me, not only with a comment, a concern, or a complaint, but a person that also brings a solution to the table. Always have,
right.
If you see there's a problem, bring a solution. And I'm not saying that's the solution that we always end up going with, but man, that tells me that you thought enough about it, not just to complain about it, but that you've thought about it long enough that you've brought a possible solution to the table. I always have a lot of respect for those type of folks.
No, I think it's a great point. And that, I think that philosophy can be applied to not only politics, but to community involvement, to business, to academia. I think it can be applied across the board. So I think it's a really smart philosophy to go by. Well, Scott, we have reached the end of our time with the podcast, and this has really been a great conversation. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it and have been inspired, to take the next step and get involved somehow. We thank you for your time. Thank you so much for being here. Good luck with your race. We'll be rooting for you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, please subscribe on iTunes or SoundCloud. And please share this podcast with friends and family and anyone else that you think would be interested in hearing from the perspectives of Portuguese-American elected officials. We need to drive conversation and get our community talking a lot more about these issues and things that are going to help our community. So thank you for listening. Thanks, Scott. Thank you, Denise. And with that, we'll see you next time on the next episode of Politicus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Politicus, the official podcast of PALITICUS, the Portuguese-American Leadership Council of the United States. PALITICUS is the premier national organization representing the interests of the Portuguese-American community at large. To learn more about PALITICUS and how to become a member or to make a donation, visit www.palcus.org. To submit feedback or suggestions about the podcast, email us at palcus@palcus.org. The views and opinions expressed by the hosts and guests of the show are not endorsed by PALITICUS.